Hey, welcome to Unit 3. This is the first video for the unit. It's 3.1 Step 1, and our learning objective for this lesson is students will be able to read Chapter 1 of While the Locust Slept and understand its historical context and setting. The question I want you to have in your mind as you're watching this video is, what is the book While the Locust Slept by Peter Razer about, and why are we reading it? So let's get going. Take some notes, please. If this book had a driver's license, it would look like this. Its name, While the Locust Slept. A locust is an insect, and you'll learn more about it in Chapter 1 of the book. The genre or type of book this book is memoir, which is a kind of autobiography. It is a true story, nonfiction, by the author, about the author. And the author's name is Peter Razer. It was published by the Minnesota Historical Society in 2001. So it's a 21st century text. Peter Razer is the author of the book While the Locust Slept. And here he is dressed in an Ojibwe costume for a powwow. It's a traditional outfit that he's wearing. And he performs now in powwows, in Ojibwe ceremonial gatherings. Even though when he was growing up, he didn't know anything about that background of his. He didn't know about the culture of his native roots. And he learns about it later. And so that's what we hear about in this book. So a little bit more about Peter Razer. His full name is James Peter Razer, and he was born in 1928. He passed away at the age of 94 in 2022. He published this book at age 72 after his children asked stories about his childhood, and he started telling them, remembering them, and writing them down. His father was his father was from the Fond du Lac band of Minnesota Chippewa, which is an Anishinaabe or Ojibwe band. But Peter was not originally from that band of Ojibwe. So what we'll learn in this story is that this is where Peter's family is from. His father was a member of this band, but Peter's born in St. Paul, and he grows up in Owatonna. So when he was young, it was decided his parents could no longer care for him, and so he was sent to the state public school at Owatonna and spent 14 years living there. In the book, it's also called an orphanage. Peter tries to run away from Owatonna at one point. He makes it all the way to Superior, Wisconsin before he's caught, and we'll read about that. At age 15, he was moved to indentured farm placement in the Rushford, Houston area, near the Wisconsin border, and he worked at a farm where he lived and also went to school. He continued working for the same family in another neighboring town called Caledonia. So these are the places we will hear about in the book, and I wanted you to see the geography and understand where exactly we are. Let's talk a little bit more about Peter's heritage as a member of the Fond du Lac band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. In Minnesota, there are now 6 Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Ojibwe bands and 4 Dakota or Sioux communities. So this map shows the reservations that exist now. The Fond du Lac band is near Duluth, and it was established by the 1854 treaty. Now, all Indian tribes have names for themselves, and Anishinaabe means the original people. Now, that is the tribe's name for who they are. Europeans named the Anishinaabe Ojibwe and Chippewa. So they are all referring to the same group of people, Anishinaabe. And many members of this tribe use the name Ojibwe, especially in this country. And in Canada, many use the name Chippewa. So we're talking about the same tribe, the same people when we use these different terms. And in the book, I think we see most often Ojibwe being used. Peter Razor didn't learn about his background, though, as a member of the Ojibwe tribe until he was an adult, because he was cut off from his family and all of that heritage. He writes in the epilogue at the very end of the book that it wasn't until he read this book by Francis Densmore called Chippewa Customs that he was able to learn more about his culture and his roots. And contrary to what he heard as a child, he found it beautiful. So as he was growing up, he was told that it was not beautiful. This was not the culture that he should want to take part of. And it wasn't until he was an adult that he decided to learn more for himself, or that he was able to decide to learn more for himself, and then found this other side of it. When he couldn't learn any more from books, he talked to tribal elders and learned from them about traditional customs. And then he enrolled as a member of the Fond du Lac Band of Ojibwe, where he learned to dance and participate in powwows, which he regularly did up until his death. You may have noticed hearing a land acknowledgement, hearing about the native land we're on at the beginning of different events, ceremonies, and concerts here in Hennepin County. Cooper High School, like all government institutions in this country, is on what was once, or still is, native land. But governments and institutions are only now starting to acknowledge this fact, some with a formal land acknowledgement ceremony. Others are even going back to native names for places like Bede-Makaska. It used to be known as Lake Calhoun, named after John C. Calhoun, a former vice president, a proponent of slavery, and a Native American removal proponent in the 1800s. Similar to how land and names were taken away from Native people, Peter lost any knowledge of his connection to his native culture by being removed from it at an early age, like many other Native children. And it came from this belief that it was because we wanted to save people, save the man, that people were killing the Indian. It is a quote from 1848, and let's talk a little bit more about it here. First of all, American Indian boarding schools opened in Minnesota and across the United States in the late 19th century. They were also called industrial schools, and these institutions prepared boys for manual labor and farming and girls for domestic work. The boarding school, whether on or off a reservation, carried out the government's mission to restructure Indians' minds and personality by severing children's physical, cultural, and spiritual connection to their tribes. This is a really dark part of history, and it comes from this idea of getting rid of the Indian, trying to make them into something else. The gentleman who really spearheaded this program was Captain Richard H. Pratt, and he is the one who came up with this quote, "Kill the Indians, save the man." And he started the Carlisle Industry School, which began these boarding schools. The schools forced tens of thousands of Native American children to leave their families and cultures behind. While the school in the book we're reading is not an Indian boarding school, the agencies that govern Peter Razor's life are most certainly informed by the racist ideology of killing the Indian and saving the man, which plays out clearly in how Peter is treated both at the state school in Owatonna and later as a foster child in farm placement. We will be dealing with three key themes in the book. The first is growing up in the margins. Growing up means moving from childhood to adulthood, from innocence to experience. Being in the margins means occupying a position or identity that is pushed to the edges of mainstream society. People who are marginalized are people who are disadvantaged due to various factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, disability, or other social identities. Standing up to oppression is our second theme. Oppression is the unjust and cruel exercise of power and authority over people to keep them powerless. It looks like discrimination, individual acts of prejudice and violence, but it can also come in the form of systemic oppression, where the injustices can't be clearly linked to it because it doesn't seem to come from just one person, but from an entire system. Characters in the book, including Peter, some of his friends, and the rare adults, stand up to unjust and cruel exercises of power. And in a sense, the writing of the book itself is a form of standing up to oppression. The third theme is the subjectivity of truth. Peter's truth is often different than the official truth in this book. In order to write the book, he used state documents that he found, which are sometimes surprisingly accurate, and the memories that he has, which are often absent entirely from the state documents, and uses both of them to tell his story. His truth is somewhere in between the lines of those state documents, which he ends up using to validate his experience on the one hand and challenging the system on the other. Telling this story allows him to voice his truth, which would otherwise not be included in history. I hope you enjoy learning about Peter's truth as you begin reading the memoir and the first chapter next of While the Locust Slept.